All right, guys, we're ready for our last work of the day, Edouard Manet's Olympia. It's a work that we've seen before, but in light of our new exam, I think we can use it as a great example of that last question, continuity and change. You may see it in the first question too if it's compared to another nude because it's part of a long-standing tradition. That's why I introduced it to you in the beginning of the semester. So I'm going to take you now to the PowerPoint directly. But now you've seen these images before. I would encourage you guys to watch one of the additional resources that I'm putting for you on the side of your Canvas page, trying to vet the best available stuff that's out there. There's just a barrage of things that you could go and find out more about. But ultimately, those things I have watched and looked through, and I think they're pretty good backups and resources to kind of enrich your understanding of the work. So immediately, I think we're going to all make a visual connection here to the Venus of Urbino from Titian. You could say subject matter and form or format of the composition basically is just a dead ripoff. Of course, details have been changed to make our sitter basically a contemporary modern woman, including the name. She's not Venus, she's Olympia. She basically represents the nickname at that time of what you would call a French prostitute. Edouard Manet seems to be updating the classical model and confronting Paris with its own ills in making us uncomfortably aware of the proximity of our world to hers. Now, I could go on about all of the content. I want you to make a note, however, on how we would have interfaced with this piece of artwork. There was a pavilion called the Salon des Refusés. And in order to show the works that had been refused for the year, the Academy decided that the hosts of the Salon would show every one of the rejected works as well. And then it would be clear, of course, to the Parisians that they had chosen the correct works for the show that year. So this was one of the biggest works in that refused show. And the pavilion was staged not far from that of the Salon. So it's quite easy for Parisians to go from one to the other and make their own judgments. People they just simply vilified Manet over this piece, saying that it was a tawdry subject, that it was improper, that it was rendered in such a way as to make the sitter look ugly, like her fingers were dirty. Any number of things came up in the press. But Manet seems to really, in earnest, have been simply examining an older classical form and trying to update it for the new contemporary era. That had been his subject in Le Déjeuner sous l'herbe, Luncheon on the Grass, of the previous year, which also was rejected from the Salon that year. Here we have a similar kind of pastoral revisited as a lunch that's been taken in the park. We have two nudes and two clothed gentlemen, and it seems immediately that this is all about impropriety. Basically, what Manet is trying to do is to take an old art form, the pastoral, where you have gods and goddesses who are unnamed and ideological, not personal, or not well known, and identified as if they're a natural part of nature. It's not too far a cry from what was winning at the Salon in years right around this time period. What you get are nymphs and satyrs and a variety of other sanitized versions of Venus and the gods enjoying the gifts of nature. But they weren't people that were knowable, people that were accessible in the world. As a matter of fact, in the same year that Olympia was put into the Salon des Refusés, this is the piece that won the whole show. So we know that it's not the nudity that's basically an affront to the art going public. It is basically the way the nudes are painted. I want you to make a note in terms of his style. Manet does something that most painters don't do. He backs his entire composition in white. He takes the canvas and puts down a layer of gesso and then paints all the colors, even black, on top of that white. It's kind of hard to tell in looking at a digital image, but if you're standing in front of this piece in the Orsay Museum, then you feel like the black is pushing just as far forward as the creamy flesh tones. And it kind of like defeats your ability to be able to say what's in front and what's in the back. It's almost kind of like a random kind of placement of paint on canvas, where we're trying to see the background is more important or the foreground is more important. And it's creating a lot of visual complexity. Where other painters had taken their black backgrounds and just vanished them into black, leaving the emphasis on the figures, we seem to be kind of lost in a composition that's becoming much more modern. If you saw the composition in the video for this piece, then you saw the inspiration was actually classical. This is an engraving by Raphael, and it shows you a typical kind of format where the nudes are in similar poses. So it does seem to be drawing from classical sources. What it does differently is its coloration. Can you guys take a look at this close up? The face of Manet's friends here are just rendered kind of flatly as flat fields of color that are loosely put together to kind of create the image of the face. The toga on the female in the back it's very gestural. None of those painted pieces are modulated away like the shadow on the leg of the female sitter or the trousers of the men who were seated there as well. And it has a very rough, almost unfinished quality or texture. So does the thigh of Manet's Olympia. When you stand in front of this in the Orsay, it almost looks like a palette knife was used on parts of her figure, and that those rough colors were not blended away or modeled away. So this seems to be not just a revolution in subject matter, but also a revolution in process. And this is the beginning of the technique that later on will become Impressionism. Manet has one foot in the realism movement, but he basically is fraternizing with the Impressionists through all of their exhibitions. He never exhibited with them, but was always seen as a father figure to that group of people. So we'll be talking about him next class as being a person who gave, Monet and all the others a place to work, a place to stay. And you'll see that if you choose to do the optional Smithsonian quiz article. Guys, don't forget the content details of the hissing cat, who was obviously alerted to our presence as someone who was not known to Victorine, the subject of the piece. The flowers that are here probably have come from her last suitor. And so we have a lot of details here that make us fully aware that this is not the Venus of the Venus of Urbino, but this is an Olympia of a contemporary piece. When you look at the brush strokes, I think you can see the rough and jagged edges here on our contemporary piece don't line up well with the regular Titian. If you're looking back to Ong for the textures, then you can see why people may have thought that this was a dirty mattress or that her fingernails and elbows were dirty. He was using black and brown as a way to kind of model up the piece, but he was doing it in a real unfinished manner. So there are lots of content details there and lots more Manets to look at. I'm going to leave it there for today and encourage you to look at some of the other resources if you want to find out more. But